right, welcome everyone. It's great to be here at the ASC 2021. My name is Jeremy Glassenberg, and today I will be talking about the API Product Lifecycle, applying design-first principles in your APIs, and the tools that help to really simplify and automate the process thanks to the magic of OpenAPI. A little bit of information about myself. I've basically been working on APIs for about 13 years now. I'm most well known for being an early employee at Box, first hire really for their developer platform. And ever since, I've worked in a wide range of companies in education technology, in supply chain at TradeShift. That's another unicorn company I'm allowed to talk about, in security at Pin.ai, and more recently in fintech. And now I'm working on an API team over at Docusign. I've also been a mentor, consultant, and advisor to many companies working on APIs. So I've seen many cases of success and also many failures in the world of APIs. And over the last 13 plus years, I've seen many struggles as well in planning, designing, and implementing APIs. But I've also seen the trend of how this has gotten easier, thanks to standards, but also thanks to OpenAPI and the tools around it. Now, I'd like to first get into a little bit of history of what things were like before OpenAPI and what things were like in those early years of OpenAPI and Swagger and those schemas prior, and where things are trending today. And then we'll get into the tools that are available and the future as well. So for those who remember the time of XML-based APIs or JSON APIs before Swagger came along, or at least before Swagger really got popular, that things were kind of messy back in the day. APIs were, for one thing, generally not RESTful because it was just more difficult for teams to really plan for a RESTful API. Documentation was a little funky. Sometimes it just wasn't there or wasn't kept up to date. Things just weren't really what they could be. In actuality, I'd say it was actually really bad. I remember at times companies attempting to become those API connectors, API aggregators, the Zapiers of the world, or Rapid API. And it was quite a struggle because APIs were not RESTful. They were very inconsistent. And it was difficult to bring all these APIs together due to the lack of consistency and the lack of standards. And for those who may remember the days before just the XML APIs, XML REST, and the days of SOAP, or for those who worked in fintech and supply chain, EDI, there's actually an API meetup group that's it's actually a group therapy session for those of us who've worked on SOAP APIs and EDI and have PTSD. Just kidding. But we do remember things being difficult and then getting a little bit easier. But then came along not just XML, JSON, which of course made it easier to establish inputs and outputs, created for simpler, more straightforward APIs. But also, one moment, but also set us up for Swagger. Back in the days of XML APIs, there was the WADL. It was a way of creating a standard schema for your XML-based API, but it wasn't well adopted. Swagger came along and fit very nicely with JSON. And yes, for SOAP, there was the WSDL, but there was something about JSON-based API that were simpler and then also had this adopted schema standard. And with that, we saw multiple benefits. For one thing, those who created APIs in the schema were more likely to create RESTful APIs. The system was designed to encourage RESTful architecture. There were example APIs you could copy and utilize. And then once you had this, you could immediately see the benefit of automation with the schema. Your API documentation could be auto-generated, for instance. And it wasn't long before we saw other tools being built around Swagger when it came to automation. Being able to, say, generate your Swagger file directly off of your code. Or, hey, generate Swagger and then auto-implement your APIs right off of your database. Take a database schema, have something that can create a Swagger schema off of it, and then whip up APIs that go right into your database. This sounded great. It helped quite a bit with automation. But on the other hand, these sort of tools, well, they were meant for code-first APIs. They assume you're first coding your API and then generating Swagger off of it. I find these tools still helpful, but for those who went the path of design-first principles for APIs, well, we want to come in at a different angle and probably use another set of tools. By the way, when I'm talking about design-first APIs or product-planned APIs, my definition is applying the common product management principles to your APIs. There are plenty of other talks in this topic, but just to set context here, what I like to highlight here is that many APIs fail because they may have just been based off of your infrastructure, internal tools. They weren't based on use case. What were the developers of your API trying to do? What would they want to build? And how do you make it as easy as possible? It's common to hear in the world of APIs, if you just build the APIs, they're going to come. And FYI, that quote, if you build it, they will come, it's a movie quote, a movie about a baseball field that after being built had attracted the ghosts of the Chicago White Sox players who took a bribe to throw a World Series. So when you think about it, the movie where this quote comes from is actually an example of building something that really doesn't attract the customers you want. We've learned in the rest of product management, in the product world, that if you build it, they will come really doesn't work for any customer-facing products in general. And just as well, it doesn't work for APIs. So applying product principles, design-first APIs is basically taking the general process for product management and applying it to your APIs. It's just that your customers are developers. That's basically understanding your business and the goals of your business and what kind of value are you providing to your customers, who are your personas. From that, conducting some research, better understanding your customers and the problems that they have. And from there, designing a solution. Once you've designed that solution, you say, well, what are the APIs that make it as easy as possible for your developers and what they're trying to do? Then we go into development. We, of course, have to plan our launch of our product and then maintain the product, collect data, prepare to iterate, and also just make sure the product is working well. And guess what? Thanks to OpenAPI, there are plenty of tools now and trending tools that make this all possible. So for those who want to apply those design principles in your API, it is getting easier and easier. These tools were lesser known a few years ago, but they're really starting to trend to encourage teams to plan their APIs because all these tools now make it easier. Some of these tools generate your Swagger, generate your OpenAPI schema, Some tools depend on the OpenAPI schema and do some automation from there, like the documentation editor. We're going to dive into all of these, but there are tools around the design process, the implementation process, when you're actually launching your API, making for a good developer experience, and when you're maintaining your APIs and also monitoring to see how they're doing and iterate on them. Among those tools, many of you are familiar with these, so I'm going to try to go through these quickly and make sure that there's time to talk about what's trending, what are the future opportunities in further automating design-first APIs. First and foremost, what I call the IDEs, the schema editors, the means of simply editing your OpenAPI schema. There's Swagger Hub by SmartBear for this. Stoplight has a great tool that plugs into GitHub and works with linters. We'll get to these tools in a moment. And Insomnia, which is a product that was acquired by Kong. So there are many editors out there, each with their different experiences, but they make it very easy to plan and design and just write down your schema first. Now, once you have the schema, what do you do with that? Well, there are tools that can limit the amount of code you have to write when you're implementing your API now. API gateways have become much simpler and much more straightforward over the last few years. I'm especially a fan of Kong, but there are many others out there that fit well with, say, your modern microservice infrastructure or whatever sort of software architecture you want to have. And these gateways, they work very nicely with OpenAPI now, such that if your API includes, say, error definitions, and those error definitions include just across the API errors like missing parameters, invalid API key, invalid token, these can be caught at the gateway layer so that you don't need to code it yourself. And the gateways can detect these things by importing your schema definitions. We also have even seen over at SmartBear code stub generators. So once you have a schema, they try to generate some basic server-side code to give you a head start on implementing your APIs. I find that to be a difficult challenge as these are making no assumptions about what your infrastructure is, your database schema, but for some, it can give a little bit of a head start. And I think there's more we can do there, and we'll get to that. Then, you've implemented your API off of your OpenAPI schema. What's next? You're trying to launch your API, and you want to have a solid developer experience when you launch, like having good documentation and ideally a good developer portal. And yes, Swagger has for many years done, and OpenAPI have done very well over many years with auto-generating documentation. But that's gotten a lot better with tools like Redoc. So there has been that default OpenAPI documentation generator, but many third-party tools now, like a Redocly, that can generate that really elegant 3-column API documentation that Stripe and other gold standard APIs are well known for. All you need now is your OpenAPI schema and literally 2 lines of HTML code to get this working. But going beyond API documentation, if you want a solid developer experience, you want to have a nice developer site for people to find guides and more information about your APIs, but also have that solid experience for when developers sign up, have a developer account, and manage their applications with you. And yes, Kong and others are creating developer portal builders. Basically, these are, they're site builders, they're CMS solutions focused on the developer portal experience. You have a nice OpenAPI schema. Often you have to plug this, you have to almost always connect this to your API gateway. And you may have an automatic system that you can customize to give developers a nice experience for registering and logging in. And of course, libraries, SDKs, mock servers. So once you have the OpenAPI schema, you don't have to manually create your API libraries and code samples on top of your APIs. Most of us who've worked on APIs know that in so many cases, the majority of developers do not call your API directly. They're working off of your libraries, your SDKs, and your code samples. And thanks to CodeGen and other tools, libraries and SDKs can be auto-generated. These things are community-driven, and sometimes they don't work well depending on the language. They work better in certain languages than others. It can be difficult to use. What I generally recommend today is still utilize these tools and maybe manually create some code samples. Yes, these libraries may not be perfect, but on the other hand, you can see how they also work well with CI/CD. When it comes to CI/CD, if you've auto-generated your SDKs, well, great. It's easier to officially support libraries and SDKs in given languages if every time you update your API, you can automatically recreate your libraries and SDKs through a generator. Then you can officially support these so that every time there's an API update, your libraries are automatically ready to go. Mock servers happen to fit nicely with certain templates for API documentation. This is basically before you're ready to create a full-fledged sandbox, simply being able to have some dummy data based off of your API definitions. As long as it's strongly formatted, they can see what's the integer, what's Boolean. They can look at the variable names and say, well, roughly what should your API seem to return? Generate some fake data and let developers play around with an API without even actually playing around with anything real. This I find is especially valuable when working in fintech or security tech, to be able to say test an API without, closing a credit card through your test calls. And you can see how this all comes together in a product stack, from design and implementation, how everything works together. Some tools can help you generate your OpenAPI schema. Other tools work off the API schema. Other tools may rely on your API gateway that work better with your API schema. And all this also works very well with CI/CD. So when you are making updates to your API, these tools can identify, is there a breaking change? What else do we need to do? Okay, well, let's push this thing, make sure that the gateway knows about this new API and is ready to go. Make sure that your documentation is automatically updated, your SDKs are updated. And now, by utilizing OpenAPI, you can design your APIs more easily and launch and update your APIs much more easily. And there are many other tools like linters. I may actually talk about that another time. These are coming up more and more as you grow and scale an enterprise and have many teams creating multiple APIs. What I really want to get to next is looking at where things are. What else can we do? It's gotten much, much easier over the last few years to apply design principles with these tools, but we know we can make this easier. I want us to keep thinking outside the box. For one thing, I've only seen a few of these, and I'm sure these can become more beyond side projects. Decorators on top of our schema that will be taking an OpenAPI schema and tweaking it automatically, enhancing it to make that more usable and allowing you to plan less for your schema and then enhance it through these decorators. As an example, here's something that I just kind of discovered and hacked together. If you're building in REST, it is so common to just have CRUD operations on top of a bunch of API model definitions. So logically, when we're planning our APIs, we should be able to just create our models first because so many of the endpoints are going to look the same. And I whipped up a page and an API that can do this, where if you have a schema that just has your model definitions, it'll take those definitions and auto-generate the endpoints, the endpoint definitions, and put it in a new schema for you. So about 80% of the content in my API schemas are actually auto-generated now. I just define the models, the CRUD operations are created, and then I just tweak them from there if we need to have anything that's a little bit away from the standard CRUD. Then let's take another look at those API designers. It's great to have an IDE kind of interface where you're looking at swag or getting warnings if you design something that's not RESTful or not according to the OpenAPI schema. But whenever there's anything in JSON or YAML, I always figure you can put a form on top of it, calling in others to figure this out. And I think MuleSoft has something like this too, where they have an API planner that's based on OpenAPI, but it's not about directly coding your API schema with OpenAPI. They give you an interface to design your API, and they just generate the schema from there. And then going beyond documentation, going beyond the developer portal when you launch an API. Many, many API companies also have an app marketplace. It goes very well with your gateway. It goes very well with your developer portal. But we're not seeing too much yet in marketplaces. There is a company, and disclaimer, I advised them in the past, OpenChannel.io, that's basically meant to be that CMS for companies who have an app marketplace to, in addition to your dev portal, plan, design, and implement your app marketplace and keep that connected with everything you have. So you don't have to build it from the ground up. Then let's look at post-launch, that time when you're monitoring, when you're trying to gather more information. We are seeing now data-focused companies that are just centered around API monitoring and analytics. And it's not just about gathering data for you as a PM or as an engineer. Let's consider a scenario like a third-party built an integration on your API, and there's something went wrong, and customers start reporting bugs. They go straight to customer service gathers some information, they go to you, the PM, or they go to the engineers, and engineering has to look at their data, look at their logs to see what happened. We're still trying to figure out, was it that our API went wrong? Was it that the partner made an API call incorrectly? Was it the partner site was just down? Well, imagine if these tools could actually be integrated right into customer service. If they're smarter and they can see exactly what went wrong, the customer service reps can actually see, I've seen this a couple of times, they integrate with Zendesk. So the customer service rep can actually identify, based on what app the customer was using, what went wrong at a high level, relay that information to the customer, relay that information over to engineering so that they had a head start in figuring out what happened. And let's just keep looking at what else can come up here. Here's something that I haven't yet seen well, but there is a lot of potential. And for those watching, if anyone is interested in a certain kind of project, feel free to reach out to me, because there are certain projects I'm proposing here, and I know others are interested in starting initiatives, open source projects, and I love to make introductions. Right now, I'd like to come back to those server-side code stubs. This is something that SmartBear created. I really appreciate what they did. They went beyond creating those libraries on top of your APIs and trying to give the API developers a head start in implementing the API by giving you some server-side code based off your API design. A challenge, though, is that this is just based off of your OpenAPI schema. It doesn't have any information on your backend. But what if we had a tool that understood your OpenAPI schema and understood some information about your backend? Like, we have your database schema and your OpenAPI schema, and we were to map it. We would look at the property names in your OpenAPI plan. We look at the property names in your database, see if there are ways of matching it, automatically match it, display something. This is something I had semi-coded, but need some help with. This is something where basically you can first automatically map some of the variables and then prompt the developer to confirm what of the OpenAPI properties map to your database. With that, we might be able to generate SQL queries and server-side code that actually is more usable because it's trying to connect not just based on the assumptions of your API design, but actually map it to your backend infrastructure. If anyone's interested in anything like this, let me know. I've been talking with a few people. I have some preliminary code. Others have been working on something here. And finally, there's just that developer experience in general. What happens to the developer advocates? Yes, we give them a developer portal so they can manage a better means of developer documentation, but how do they manage their interactions with developers? How do we better watch what's going on when developers are posting both in Stack Overflow and messaging you or pinging you on Twitter? And what else can we do to better track where developers are when they're working on your API? When they get started, when they're first just testing your APIs, how can you tell if a developer may be struggling, getting frustrated, and kind of dropping off? We have all these tools and sales to do it. The concept of developer relationship management has been trending. I've heard a few startups pushing this term now and building software based off of that, just around helping developer advocates work with their developer communities. And as I've noted, there are other tools as enterprises have grown as we to coordinate across APIs to help establish consistency across your APIs. There's plenty more to come. I encourage you all to try out the current tools and just keep a lookout for what else may come along. And again, if you want to really support the community, find your way of taking your ideas or joining in with other ideas and making those open source contributions that we can build this better future with the OpenAPI schema, with plugins and all these tools around it. Thank you for putting up with me for 25 minutes. I will be around for any questions you have.
Hey everyone. Now that we're past the recording, I think we just have a few minutes for Q&A. Anthony, so you have an interesting comment here. Were you talking about the Swagger decorators, like having something to work with your general code generation? Oh no, you were talking about the taking Swagger and using it to generate your API code. That's what you commented on. Yeah, OAS to DB. Yep. Yeah, I've heard a few different teams talking about this idea, so I'm hoping to see some more advanced server-side code stub generators soon on that front. I think there's enough interest and a lot of potential. I hacked something like that not too long ago, and I could see how it's certainly feasible to generate at least a step up above what we have today from the auto generators. Any other questions for today? Apicuria will generate the CRUD ops. This is good to know about. I have seen among some of the gateways some tools here or there to start auto-generating parts of the Swagger schema. And generating CRUD off of a model just makes sense. I'm sure there's more out there. Most recently, I've seen some tools to take loosely typed Swagger and create strongly typed versions of it. Apicurio, admittedly, I haven't checked myself. So, Chris, thanks for sharing that. I'll actually take a look at that sometime later this week, hopefully. For anyone out there, if you don't have any questions at this time, but you just want to get in touch with me, feel free to shoot me an email, or I'm not sure if my email is shared here, but my name is there. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just reach out and connect, and happy to chat further about any of this. Otherwise, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely looking forward to other sessions today. And we may have another question here. Oscar, I plan to integrate a SOAP UI version project running mock servers inside Docker container Grafana for monitoring. Yeah, I do appreciate those who are posting other just tools they recommend today. SOAP UI, seen that one commonly used. Nice thing about what's going on with distributed architecture is many of the modern gateways are positioning themselves to be those solutions for modern distributed microservice-based infrastructure, and they're also providing these sort of tools as part of their solution. I would agree, payload generation is not easy with the non-trivial APIs. When I used a CRUD generator, for the majority of APIs that I've worked on, it's done the trick, or at least it's done the trick most of the way. But with an emphasis that API should be based on use case, that doesn't always mean they should be fully CRUD based on your models. So yes, this does a lot of work for you, this script that I whipped up, but it doesn't solve everything. When you're focused on use case, you will start to run into some I'm not going to call them non-standard, but not as simple examples of getting your APIs up. Stuart, I'm actually curious, since you also mentioned hand curation of sample data. So I certainly understand hand curation of the OpenAPI schema. When it comes to generating mock data, well, first of all, I find that in many cases, the OpenAPI schema wasn't strongly typed. And when it's loosely typed, you're not going to get much luck with the mock data generators. When it's strongly typed, yes, granted, they're dependent mostly on the types and formats and to some extent the names of your properties. When you have enough unique properties, the data you're going to get is just not going to align. So you have to, in your schema, write specific samples for the mock servers to import. I'm guessing that's what you're getting. You get into that point where these properties, even if strongly formatted, are very unique. That is what you've encountered. Yeah, I am hoping for the next generation mock servers to have some better AI, maybe have a better list of commonly used properties based on names, maybe have a learning system to start to adapt based on others that they received. But yeah, today it's mostly about taking a strongly typed schema and then relying off the type, the format, I think to some extent the property names. What I've seen as other efforts are really to go not just into mock servers, but try to get into sandbox. Creating an actual functional sandbox is, saying team who's done it, not easy. And that's probably take less AI work, but is going to take a lot more work than just having a mock server that works off of an OpenAPI schema. Oh, so you've literally hacked the mock server generators. You've taken the code and you've modified them yourself. Awesome. And I'm curious how you did it. Was it about basically setting up a list of like properties by name and then knowing based on those names what the samples really should be? I'm very intrigued now what you were doing here. Feel free to message me afterwards. I'm not sure if you're still there, Stuart, but I would actually love to get more about this story and see what you had to do with the mock service today, if it's something you can contribute to the existing solutions. Oh, here we go. Okay, I wasn't able to get that to load, but I think we can maybe touch base after the conference. But thank you for your feedback here on handling mock servers. It's an area that's working, but is kind of light today, in my opinion. FYI, I think your second link has a typo in it as well. I see a comma on there instead of a period. Yeah, try one more time. Oh, for those who are still around, I apologize. I was actually looking at one tab and I see someone else posted another question a few minutes ago. Don't you think, so Stuart asked, don't you think that making a link between the spec and the backend details will somehow encourage the flow of details into the API? Sebastian, I think what you're getting at is there are tools out there today that take a database schema and can actually generate a Swagger schema and an API right off the database. It makes it very easy to whip up APIs right off your database. It's not something, though, that I would encourage for external APIs, because then your APIs are based off of your internal system rather than based on use case. And very often when I've discussed the idea of this other direction, the server-side code stubs, people immediately say, why do you need that? We already have this. We already have this means of generating off the database. And I say, yeah, we have something to generate off the database, but those are not going to work for external APIs. And so it is a valid concern that people will get this concept kind of mixed up. I suppose what you're also getting at is, well, if we're just mapping it to the database, is there a risk the flow is going to be too tied to the database? Ideally, the schema is written entirely manually from based on use case and not dependent on your database. So if you write this thing independently, focused on your use case, and then run the mappings, at least from that initial design, it really shouldn't be the case. The idea is to provide some sort of an automation of the development without having to rely on knowledge of your DB design, allowing the API to operate as that layer in between your external plan and your database. But I think that is a valid question. Then once you have a tool like that, will people tweak the DB and then kind of position their Swagger accordingly, perhaps unintentionally start to position their Swagger schema, their OpenAPI schema off of their database more than off of the use case? My hope is that it really isn't the case, but if we actually create something like this, we can see the results and see how it fits with those who are applying design principles versus infrastructure-based principles. All right, and coming back to chat, sorry, people are asking questions on two different segments here in Hopin. All right, I thank you all for those who posted some extra blog articles, some extra links. Yes, these are things I agree with. This is about, for those folk who are really advocating designing your API from use case, here are the tools to help with that today. I'm getting a signal that I think we're out of time here. Just went through the questions, but yeah, to the ASC folk, I think we are done with the questions. Again, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to find me on LinkedIn or find me here on Hopin. It was great to meet you all. Thanks for putting up with me for 30 minutes. Take care, everyone.